The sealed the pit with the men still inside. Brutal.
Take a look at this chimney. This is something known as a candlestick.
That's cool.
As you might imagine, coal mines need ventilation, and so in almost every coal mine built at the time, you'll find one of these
children yearn for the mines.
Chimneys built above ground. It's not at all unusual to see one of these. With that said though, this candlestick and the mine below it are unusual, but for a different reason.
Okay.
Instead of this candlestick being
Wellington.
at the end of the mine, stopping short of the Irish Sea, it's more like the beginning. There was a tunnel known as the main road that would eventually stretch 6 miles beneath the seabed above.
That's insane.
And this main road was the only way in and the only way out for the hundreds of men who worked here. It's almost unbelievable that it even existed in the first place, but like the infamous Levant mine disaster, the tragedy here was almost worse than if the tunnel had simply flooded. This is the horrifying story
what
of
could
the
have
Wellington
happened?
Pit
Was it like an
disaster.
underground
As
explosion
always,
or something?
Viewer discretion is advised.
Yeah, chat. Viewer discretion is advised. If you're scared of that kind of thing, you should leave now. No AI generated. What's crazy to me is that he doesn't use AI. Like a lot of these like pictures, I would thought like, oh, maybe he used it assisted or something, but he doesn't.
When I first began covering mine disasters on the channel, and especially the Levant mine disaster, which you may remember as the mine disaster under the ocean, I almost couldn't believe that mines were constructed under bodies of water, let alone the ocean itself. Ooh. It just seemed like an insane thing to do, especially given the time period a lot of this was going on. Sure, you can see how a tunnel might be constructed underwater with modern technology and engineering, but to imagine men without electricity using gas lanterns for light creating these tunnels is just kind of weird. But
don't see any women out in there, yeah. Just men being men, am I right, fellas?
Incredibly, that intuition is completely off. These tunnels were actually surprisingly common, and at one point there were dozens that ran under the ocean in England alone. And so another weird thing to think about is that if you happen to be born in one of these mining towns in the 1800s or early 1900s,
you're kind of screwed.
If you were, it's pretty likely that your father would have been a miner, and
then you'd also be a miner, and then your kids are gonna be miners if they're men.
Also eventually be a miner.
Men
and at
doing
some point,
manly
you just
things,
find yourself
dude.
trudging through a candlelit tunnel under the ocean. It makes you feel lucky to have not had the misfortune of being born into one of these towns built on the mining industry, much like Whitehaven, England in 1910.
Oh, this looks nice.
Located on the western coast of England, Whitehaven was a mining town through and through. Even today, coal mining is credited with the prosperity that Whitehaven has experienced over more than 100 years.
Wow.
Everyone knew at least one person who worked the Wellington.
Dude, England, like, I read a lot of books about horrible, like, it's called Horrible Histories, and it's like digestible history for like younger kids. Probably like from ages like maybe 8 to 12, maybe a little bit older than that. The amount of crap people put up with back in the day, like during the Industrial Revolution, the Victorian era. Damn, dude.
Coal mine, also called the Wellington Pit. And at the time, it was worked by both men and teenage boys, as child labor laws were different in the early 20th century. The Wellington Pit would eventually come to have a 6-mile underground tunnel called the Main Road that ran all the way under the Irish Sea to the west.
Ooh.
Tunnels also ran perpendicular to the main road in offshoots to extract the coal adjacent to the main seam. But otherwise, this main road was the only way in.
Based on diagrams from old newspapers, articles showing main shafts, actual proportions might still differ. More detailed sources or maps are unavailable. So it's an interpretation.
The only way out.
Got it.
And you might be thinking, well, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. And it was.
Do you just like hold your breath the whole time?
It was even known to mine engineers at the time. By the early 1900s, it was recommended to have multiple exit tunnels for redundancy, but either due to cost or practicality, these weren't always in place. Another interesting feature of mines like the Wellington Pit was the massive ventilation fans that worked to circulate air. For example, the one that forced air down the 6-mile main road was 24 feet in diameter and rotated 126 times per minute. They needed something so massive because the maximum depth of the mine was also close to 1,000 feet underground, plus all of the horizontal tunnels. The mine would eventually be so expansive that it was split up into districts named 3, 5, and 6. But despite what seemed almost like alien conditions though, the pit was
you can't see a damn thing under there. You just had like a rely on the little candle or a flashlight. Yeah, they would have had flashlights then. Yeah, right. Yeah, they would have. Yeah.
Constant hive of activity.
Candles
with 723
and flashlights.
employees split
Probably
among
candles.
3 round-the-clock shifts. And on May 11th, 1910, the overnight shift workers at the Wellington Colliery in Whitehaven, England, were just getting the night underway. Sometime between 7:30 and 8 o'clock that evening, an unusual noise was heard by the men in the pit, sounding almost like distant thunder. In District 5 North, miner Joe Kenmore was with 2 other men, and the noise made them stop their work immediately. The environment inside on any given day ranged from loud to deafening, with drills running, pickaxes chipping away at the walls, and men shouting.
Nothing a little cancer and a little, hearing loss doesn't, attribute to your healthy lifestyle. They didn't have Big Macs back then.
One another, but the sound Joe and the others heard wasn't any of those things. The 3 miners looked at each other as they all instinctively sensed danger.
Uh-oh.
They then rushed out to the main road, which stretched the entire length of the pit, and saw in the distance a dust cloud. They then tried to approach it using a couple different routes, but it was too difficult to tell if it was safe through the dust, and soon they felt the heat and smelled the smoke. At the same time, elsewhere in the district, a small crew of 24 was under the supervision of miner Jack Ware, who had no idea anything out of the ordinary was going on until his teenage son shouted at him about the noise. So gathering the others, Jack then led them down the corridor toward the main road where it intersected with District 6 and ran into Joe and the 2 miners he was with. Joe and the other 2 had been waiting there for a while to see if they'd receive any communication or direction on where to go or what to do, so Jack and his larger group waited with them for a bit.
Yeah, there's a fire.
This was actually a good place to be at the time, as clean air flowed out of District 6 into 5, but Jack got impatient as they waited. He then got up and said he was going to try to escape if anyone wanted to join him. In response, Joe was the only one among them who volunteered, and holding rags of their mouths and noses, the 2 soon disappeared into the smoke, leaving the others behind, including Jack's son.
They went in there?
The smoke Joe and Jack ran into was so thick that their lanterns were of absolutely no use.
Oh my God.
They actually had to resort to crawling through the tunnel because both the fire and smoke were above them and the ground was relatively clear.
Yeah, that's why they tell you if there's a fire in the house, you shouldn't walk through it, you should crawl because the smoke rises. At least you'll get a little bit of oxygen and you don't suffocate immediately. So keep that in mind. If that ever happens to you, Chad, you get into a fire in a building, start crawling. Yeah, it might still not be very pleasant, I'm sure, but at least you have a chance.
This was grueling and it was extremely hot, but they managed to squeeze through several rock falls on their way, and within an hour, they exited the pit and collapsed outside. Between the effort and the smoke, though, the lungs of both men were shot, and they had no idea how lucky this effort would turn out to be. The 2 men were stunned to see only the above-ground crew outside the pit. This meant they were the only ones to have made it out at that point.
Oh,
Joe and Jack then shared what they saw along their escape route and reported fire blocking off the main road, likely keeping the others trapped. The mine manager then formed a search party to find out what was going on and help anyone who might need it. As the search party advanced down the main road, the tunnel got hotter and smokier. Then when the group was around 80 yards from the fire, they were forced back the way they came by its intensity. And based on what they could see ahead, the fire had completely blocked the only way out, and the realization set in, the men were trapped. Word of the fire then spread throughout Whitehaven, and families of the miners rushed to the Wellington Pit, creating so much traffic that the only 2 roads leading to the coastline were backed
People
up.
are freaking out.
By the early morning hours of May 12th, there were thousands of people waiting quietly and anxiously outside the pit. But when the sun came up over Whitehaven, the miners who had been rescued overnight numbered a total of just 7.
Out of how
many? It was learned that most of the men were confined in an area more than 3 miles away from the main shaft. A rescue party worked through the morning to reach the miners, but it took time to get there with the smoke that was now throughout the tunnel system.
And then the pressure from the fire, like the heat.
It even started making its way out, creating a smoke trail in the sky about a mile long.
Yikes.
Just like other rescue groups, though, this one was also pushed back by the smoke, fumes, and the heat from the fire. The next group inside would try to get closer so they could fight the fire and hopefully extinguish it, but without proper breathing equipment, it would be next to impossible to get close enough without succumbing to the dangerous levels of carbon monoxide.
They didn't have like freaking masks like people do now that lets them breathe through like a little oxygen tank.
Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, Britain's Chief Inspector of Mines, J.B. Atkinson, arrived at the Wellington Pit. And after being briefed, he, along with the Inspector of Mines for the Northeast District, H.A. Abbott, entered the pit to get a better sense of the situation. They learned that the men in the rescue parties were cloaking themselves in a brattice cloth, which is a fire-resistant sheet usually hung to protect the coal in case a fire breaks out. However, by the time any of those men got close enough, the brattice cloth would get so hot they couldn't even continue hanging on to it.
Oh no!
By this point as well, the situation had long since reached dire levels. The fire and smoke had spread, raising both the level of noxious fumes and the intensity of the heat the fire was putting off. JB and HA then left the pit to discuss the next moves, and after a little bit of time, they came to the decision to completely evacuate the mine of rescuers. In response, the crew of miners and volunteers outside was furious. Some of them actually needed to be pulled away from the entrance by others to keep them from entering. However, in JB's professional opinion, there was no human who could survive the conditions inside the mine.
Yeah,
He had
no
seen it with his
shit.
own eyes and felt the heat on his skin, even though the fire was well ahead of him during his assessment. So at 9 o'clock that night, Wellington Pit officials met with the inspectors to discuss the decision to end the rescue efforts. During this conversation, despite the inspectors' belief that the rest of the men were dead, they compromised with mine officials and sent for a special rescue team located in Ellswick, just less than 100 miles away.
Dude, it's
This
gonna take
team arrived
forever for
around
them to
11
get
p.m.
there.
with advanced...
Oh my god, that's their outfit. It looks like a scuba suit.
equipment
Those
that
old
included
school
breathing
ones?
apparatuses that would allow them to stay in the mine and breathe clean air for about an hour.
It's still
And
really
wasting
hot
no time,
in there,
just
though.
before 11:30, they descended into the pit along with the inspectors, mine officials,
Dude,
and a
it's
few
so
extra
far
miners
away,
in case a hand was
too.
needed.
How much did they say? It was like 6 miles out into the sea? That's insane, by the way.
It would take well over an hour for them to reach even the vicinity of the fire, which was close to 3 miles down the main.
Yeah, I was about to say, I walk around about 5 miles in an hour, and they're like rushing there, and they have the suits on. So like, they were hurrying, they were hustling.
Road. When
Yeah,
the smoke and
or
fumes got to be too much to breathe, the
leisurely
special
walk
rescue team
5
stopped
miles
and
an
put their
hour.
helmets on. Helmets that looked no different than those a diver would wear were then lifted onto their heads and placed on their shoulders. Then when they were all suited up, they pushed forward while the others backtracked to escape the intensity of the conditions. After carrying on about 170 yards further though, the team was also forced back by the blinding smoke. Visibility was basically zero and they could walk right into the fire and not know it until it was too late.
What caused the fire?
Things
We
were
don't know
so
yet.
hot and so hazardous that one of the men had his legs burned when he tripped over telegraph wires that had fallen.
Oh no!
Just a brief moment of contact between the wire and his pants had left him with a severe burn mark. Before they turned back, they reached another section where there was brattice cloth hanging from the roof. One of the men then reached beyond it to test the air temperature and quickly pulled his bare hand back, describing it to the others like putting his hand in an oven.
Yeah.
And in fact, even on the cool side where the men were was extremely hot. Inside each of the men's helmets was a nameplate so they could be identified if the worst happened. The intense heat
Oh.
actually melted parts of the nameplate, which then dripped onto the men's faces, giving them excruciating burn blisters.
Oh, you can just Oh.
As a result of all this, to them, it was abundantly clear that no one could have survived being trapped on the other side, and there was no sense of going any further.
Oh.
They then turned around to meet up with the others, and all of them silently made their way out of the pit.
Oh, that's terrible.
The groups of friends and relatives outside found out about the special rescue team just after they arrived several hours prior, and it filled them with hope for the first time in more than 24 hours. Watching that same team exit the pit without the other men was devastating. The realization hit them all at once,
little
but as many of them
kids.
started sobbing, there was an eerie quiet, as if the grief was so strong they couldn't make a sound. The tragedy was just inconceivable. 136 men and boys were believed to be dead, and many of the thousands
And
outside
there were kids in there too, because kids yearn for the mines, chat. Yeah, they threw them in there to work basically as soon as they could like handle more than a couple of hours of like work at that point. We don't realize like, yeah, there's obviously still child labor around, but like this was like actually just like, this was honestly like morally acceptable to send your kids into the mines. They're small for some tasks. Yeah, for reaching into like small little areas that like big men couldn't reach. Yeah, creating like little mining shafts for them.
refused to believe it.
This is like
At
less than
some
100
point
years
overnight,
ago, I
JB
think,
made
right?
a decision that wasn't
Yeah.
arrived at lightly. His experience had already told him a day earlier that there was no way anyone could survive inside the pit, but it still horrified him to give the order he was about to communicate. Fighting a mine fire requires a specific course of action. The only way to put out the fire was to starve it of oxygen, and the only way to do that was to construct a brick wall to block off the tunnel between the main shaft and the fire.
No, to stop
And
it.
again, JB
to
knew better
basically
than to think this was the
suffocate it,
case,
yeah.
but his order to build a wall still felt like sending 136 people to their deaths and
That's
countless family
true.
members into grief.
Yeah, you're taking a big risk.
It was a decision he didn't take lightly, but knew it had to be
Yeah.
done. Several hours later, the following morning, around 3,000 miners from nearby cities and towns gathered in Whitehaven city center. This group actually planned on forcing officials to resume the rescue effort by whatever means necessary. When they reached the outside of the mine together, they clashed with the police that blocked off the entrance. Some of them even scaled walls in an attempt to reach the pit, but no one actually entered, and cooler heads eventually prevailed. JB then agreed to allow 3 of the men to meet with him and the rest of the authorities on the scene to make their case for restarting a rescue effort. In the meeting, they passionately implored them to reconsider, but JB managed to convince them that the miners inside were gone, and sending anyone else into the mine to do
Probably.
anything but build the wall
Yeah.
was unnecessarily risking lives. With this revelation, the 3 protesters returned to the others to share the news.
That sucks,
As they
man.
left, the grieving family members who were already flooded with emotions apparently lashed out at the newly arrived miners for disturbing the solemn silence they had maintained throughout the night.
That's fair.
To them, all their presence did was further upset the family.
Well, it's like, do you want the entire fucking village or town to blow up, or do you sacrifice them for the greater good? Like, it's such a tough moral decision. It's like, what do you do? But better for the collective, or try and like save like one person and then like have them blow up afterwards. It sucks. I don't know if I could do something like that. It's fucked up. Especially, you also have to take into consideration, these are all people that knew each other back in the day. Like, they all had, you know, they probably had drinks at bars and like went out. Like, one of them was a barber, maybe had like a job as a miner too. Like, they knew each other. It wasn't like, oh, we lived in a town and then we just decided to like rock it off, you know, block it off and have them be stuck in there. Yo, Trace, thank you for the raid. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know.
Construction of the wall then started and continued into Saturday as the available crew and
This looks
volunteers worked
hardcore,
tirelessly
dude.
after the order was given.
This
As they
isn't easy,
did, many
too.
of those who assisted had to keep reminding themselves that the men were already gone as they cut off the only way out brick by
Yeah,
brick.
like the mental.
On Sunday morning,
I don't know
several
if
of the
I can do
mine's
that,
managers
bro.
entered the pit one last time with their own breathing apparatuses to see if they could find the source of the fire just before the brick wall was complete.
Wait. I think this is this a reference to like back in the day they didn't have like measurements for like air quality, and if the bird dies that means that you should get out? Oh my god, I just like, this is another like weird thing that I just remembered. Yeah, the canaries are more sensitive, so like they didn't have apparatus. So you'd bring a little bird with you, and if the bird dies, you should get out.
Completed.
Mining
When they had
canary, yeah,
walked
that's
about
right.
halfway to the
Wow,
suspected
dude.
location of the fire, they were
That's
almost
crazy.
overcome by the fumes and put on the helmets connected to clean air.
Mm-mm-mm.
After advancing a bit further, the canary that one of them was carrying in a cage fell off its swing.
Oh,
If you've heard the expression
no.
canary in a coal mine as an expression of impending danger, it
Yeah.
literally came from the use of canaries as early indicators of high levels of carbon
It's
monoxide.
crazy how we still use that metaphor, even though it's like literally been like 100 years. Canary in a
Their
coal
respiration
mine,
rate
yeah.
makes them more susceptible to gases, and they show symptoms of
'Cause they're
poisoning well
small.
before humans do. So if a canary passed out inside a mine, it would indicate to miners that it was time to leave. With the breathing helmets, they were able to continue on, but it was just more confirmation of the fate of the men stuck inside.
Poor
A little
birdie,
further up,
too.
they encountered several piles of rock that partially blocked the tunnel, but again, when the heat was far too intense, they had to turn back. Based on what they saw and felt, the managers suggested that 2 more walls be built, as it was possible some of the cave-ins could have opened to lower levels, which would have supplied oxygen to the fire. These were then also worked on, and after the last brick was in place on the last wall, the workers left the mine
They
and the
had to
pit sat
go.
abandoned for months as smoke poured out of it.
Yeah.
The black and gray clouds coming from the air intake every day were a constant reminder of the loved ones lost on May 10th.
So sad.
When the smoke finally cleared and the mine officials were certain the fire was out, workers returned
Yeah,
to
it
the
takes forever for it to go out. Like, yeah, obviously it's not gonna suffocate instantly because you're gonna get oxygen through the mine, but like obviously when you seal it off, it'll stop it from spreading, or at least spreading as much.
pit to tear down the walls and began the horrific task of removing the
finding
bodies,
the bodies.
most of which were
Oof.
badly decomposed or burned or both.
Oh,
As those contributing to the recovery finally saw the extent of the fire, it became clear that the 136 simply had no chance of escaping. The conditions inside were just impossible. With that
Oof.
said though, it was clear that those inside were alive for at least a few hours before the smoke became too much or the fire reached them.
aw.
And the scene inside the section that trapped the crew was heartbreaking. The youngest victim was a 15-year-old lamp carrier named Robert Garraway.
Aw.
Another 44-year-old father named Thomas McAllister was found embracing his 17-year-old son James as the two died in each other's arms.
That's so sad.
5 other McAllisters also died in the fire, almost destroying the
7.
family completely. Another of the miners had removed all his
7.
clothes, which were found neatly folded in a pile next to him.
Aw.
Some of the trapped had even written messages on the steel pit doors with chalk. As these bodies were brought to the surface, they were laid in a row outside the mine entrance.
Aw.
This, as you might imagine, was unimaginable and surreal for the family members
Yeah,
as they
the
were
people
brought up to view the
finding them,
bodies and identify their
too.
loved ones. In all, the tragedy left 85 women widowed and 260
85 women, and then they have a bunch of kids, and then they don't have anyone to take care of them.
children without fathers. And the process itself was
Oh,
a
like,
terribly
it's their
traumatic
fault.
necessity of the disaster that was made even worse when the last body was pulled from the mine.
Family.
Since 135 others have been identified, there was only one person it could be, and yet somehow it wasn't the right person. Also by that point, the others had been buried in local cemeteries, which meant that it was an awful mistake, and to this day, at least one of the men is buried under the wrong headstone. A later investigation determined that the cause of the fire was an explosion when an accumulation of methane gas reached dangerous levels. Methane, which is a naturally occurring byproduct of coal mining, is highly flammable, especially in high volumes. And it's believed that a damaged safety lamp is what caused the gas to combust. The King Edward Medal for Bravery shown in industrial accidents was presented to 64 rescuers for their efforts, which is still the most ever awarded from a single incident. And the Wellington Pit disaster remains one of the deadliest mining disasters in English history.
Toast to heroes, bravest and best.
If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I also want to say thanks for all the incredible story suggestions that you've all sent in.
That was a cool,
There are so many
like, sad
fascinating stories that
story.
have now been covered on the channel that I never would have heard of if it weren't for all of you. Also, as a quick note, as the channel has grown, as you might imagine, it's gotten harder and harder to respond to all the messages across platforms. I actually tried for a long time to respond to everything, but it just become too difficult to keep track of everyone. So I'm sorry if you sent something in and didn't get a response.
1.82
With that said though, the current best way to submit a story is through the story suggestion form in the description, and if you have any other general questions, sending me an email is the best way to get in contact. But anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.
We will. I've been watching this guy for a long time. He does really good videos. Okay, my chargers are dying. This one's dying. It's about to go out. It's doing the red beeping. All right. Overworking.